Vivian Hart had always lived life on her own terms, independent, strong-willed, and fiercely protective of her dignity. She refused to be bought, even by Alexander Kane, the billionaire CEO whose fortune and influence could solve every problem in her life. Years ago, she had walked away from him, rejecting his lavish gifts and controlling offers, vowing never to let money dictate love. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. When an unexpected medical emergency threatens her young daughter, and every doctor turns them away, Alexander reappears, not just as the man who once loved her, but as her child's only chance at survival. The walls Vivian built around her heart and her pride now face their greatest challenge: trust. Can she set aside past wounds and accept help from the man she once left behind? Or will her pride cost her everything she holds dear? The city lights glittered against the night sky like scattered diamonds. But inside the private wing of St. Vincent's Hospital, the glow of fluorescent lamps cast a sterile chill over the room. Vivian Hart clutched her daughter Lila tightly against her chest, her knuckles white, her mind spinning with fear. The doctors had given her no hope. Every specialist she reached out to turned her away. Money, influence, nothing seemed enough. And yet, she refused to call Alexander Kane, the man whose shadow still lingered in her heart. Years ago, she had walked away from him. She remembered the cold glint in his eyes when she said no to his proposal. She remembered the weight of his fortune, the way he tried to control her with his wealth. She had chosen independence over security, pride over love, and she had believed she made the right choice. But tonight, as Lila coughed violently and struggled to breathe, pride seemed like a distant, foolish luxury. Panic clawed at her chest, and desperation clouded every thought. Vivian knew she needed help, a miracle, and she knew who could deliver it. The moment Alexander Kane appeared at her apartment door, the years of anger and resentment surged back. He was just as impeccably dressed, just as commanding, and just as painfully handsome as she remembered. But there was something different in his gaze tonight. It was softer, almost vulnerable, yet determined, a man used to getting what he wanted. And yet, here he was not asking, but insisting. "I heard about Lila," Alexander said, voice calm but urgent. "I can help. Let me." Vivian's instinct was to slam the door in his face, to remind herself why she left him, why she never needed him. But the sound of Lila's wheezing, the panic in her tiny eyes, cut through her defenses like a blade. Alexander was the only chance her daughter had. "I don't need your money," she spat, stepping back, trying to regain control over the flood of emotions. "And I definitely don't need you." Alexander's jaw tightened. "It's not about money, Vivian, it's about saving her life, and you know I can do it." The words felt like a trap, yet also like a lifeline. Pride and desperation waged war within her, each pulling her in opposite directions. The woman who had walked away from Alexander Kane years ago was being forced to confront the man she never fully stopped loving, now standing as her child's only hope. After a tense silence, Vivian exhaled slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Fine," she whispered, "but this doesn't mean anything." Alexander nodded, his usual arrogance tempered by concern. "I don't expect it to. Let's just save her." In that moment, past grievances and lingering resentment seemed to fade, replaced by the urgent, raw reality of fear and hope. Alexander took her hand gently, guiding her and Lila toward the car. Every step felt surreal. Her daughter, fragile and terrified, was in his hands, and she had no choice but to trust him. As they drove through the night, the city blurred into streaks of neon and shadow. Vivian watched Alexander's profile in the rearview mirror, noticing details she had forgotten: the way his brow furrowed when worried, the slight tremor in his hands, the rare softness in his eyes. He was still Alexander Kane, commanding, confident, infuriatingly irresistible, but he was also human. For the first time in years, Vivian felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. A fragile thread of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could save Lila. And maybe, just maybe, they could survive the storm of their past together. But the night was far from over. As the hospital loomed closer, Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that this reunion would change everything, not just for Lila, but for her, and even for Alexander Kane himself. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed softly as Vivian clutched Lila in her arms, the tiny girl trembling against her chest. Every second felt like an eternity. Alexander walked beside her, a protective shadow, his hand occasionally brushing against hers, a reminder that he was there, steadfast and unyielding. As they reached the pediatric emergency ward, a nurse glanced at Alexander, recognition flickering across her face. "Mr. Kane, you're here," she said softly, though her tone held awe. He didn't answer, only nodded curtly, eyes fixed on Lila. Vivian could see the determination etched in every line of his face. The same man who once seemed untouchable, now utterly human in the face of her daughter's fragility. They were ushered into a private room. Machines, beeping monitors, and the sterile smell of antiseptics surrounded them. Vivian set Lila on the hospital bed, her hands trembling. The little girl's breaths were shallow, but there was a spark of fight in her eyes. Alexander bent over, examining her as if he had studied every possible solution in advance. "She has a rare cardiac condition," he said, almost to himself, "and it's worse than the doctors feared." Vivian froze. "What do you mean?" Her voice cracked, a raw edge of panic breaking through her controlled facade. "I mean," Alexander said slowly, "she needs immediate surgery. Without it, we could lose her." His tone was clinical, yet something in his gaze told her he cared not just as a CEO or benefactor, but as a man who had been shaken to his core. Vivian shook her head, panic clawing at her throat. I don't know if I can." "You can," Alexander interrupted gently. "You've already done more than anyone else could. You brought her here in time. Now let me handle the rest." The past came rushing back for Vivian. The nights Alexander had waited for her in silence. The arguments, the heartbreak of leaving him, and yet, the undeniable pull that had never truly faded. And now, here he was, proving that some things, some people were impossible to leave behind entirely. 4 hours. They worked together with the medical team. Vivian watched Alexander coordinate with surgeons, explaining procedures, authorizing specialists, and ensuring every possible resource was available. It was shocking to see the man who had once seemed cold and untouchable transform into a figure of hope and authority for her daughter's life. When the surgery finally began, Alexander stayed by Vivian's side, gripping her hand tightly. "She's strong," he murmured. "She's going to fight, just like her mother." Vivian felt a lump in her throat. That simple acknowledgement, his recognition of her strength, and his unwavering support was more than she had expected. It wasn't about pride, money, or power anymore. It was about love. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, somehow, the man she had left behind could be the one to help her family survive. Hours stretched into an anxious eternity. Finally, the surgeon emerged, exhausted but smiling. "The operation was a success," he announced. "She's stable. She need care and rest, but she made it through." Vivian exhaled, tears streaming freely down her face. She wanted to fall into Alexander's arms, to tell him everything, the pain, the pride, the love she still carried. But instead, she simply whispered, "Thank you." Alexander's hand tightened over hers, a silent reassurance. No words were needed. The past, the heartbreak, the years of distance, all of it faded in that hospital room, leaving only the fragile beginnings of trust and hope. As they sat together, watching Lila sleep peacefully, Vivian couldn't ignore the truth. The man she had rejected years ago had become her lifeline, and she realized, with both fear and a flicker of longing, that this reunion wasn't just about saving her daughter. It was about confronting the past and discovering whether the love she thought she had lost could find its way back into her life. That night, the city outside seemed to hold its breath, mirroring the stillness and tension inside the hospital. Vivian and Alexander remained there, bound not just by circumstance, but by the invisible threads of shared history, hope, and a fragile promise of second chances. And deep down, Vivian knew that what started as a desperate plea for help could very well become a journey neither of them had anticipated, a journey of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps, love. The following days at St. Vincent's Hospital were a whirlwind of monitors, medications, and quiet victories. Lila's condition, while still fragile, was steadily improving under the watchful eyes of the surgeons and nurses. Vivian found herself, torn between relief and exhaustion, pacing the corridors, her thoughts a tangle of fear, pride, and an undeniable gnawing attraction to the man who had become her daughter's lifeline. Alexander rarely left her side, even in moments when Vivian tried to push him away, reminding herself of the years of heartache. The cold arguments, the pride she had clung to. He remained patient, unyielding, but never overbearing. His presence was both infuriating and comforting. She hated how safe she felt near him, hated how quickly her walls were crumbling. Yet part of her couldn't deny that his touch, his glance, even his quiet confidence, had always been irresistible. One evening, as the hospital settled into a lull, Vivian found herself sitting beside Lila's bed, holding her tiny hand. Alexander entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea, and offered one to her without a word. They sat in silence for a while, watching the soft rise and fall of Leela's chest. "I can't believe I'm saying this," Vivian admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't know how I would have managed this without you." Alexander set his cup down and reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You never had to manage alone," he said gently. "I've always been here, even when you didn't want me to be." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. All the memories of their past, the laughter, the arguments, the unspoken confessions flashed before her eyes. And in that moment, Vivian realized something she had long buried. She had never stopped loving him. Alexander's expression softened, a rare vulnerability flickering across his features. "Vivian, I know I've made mistakes. I know I can't undo the past. But seeing you here, seeing Leela, I need you to know something. I've never stopped caring. And I don't want to waste any more time pretending otherwise." Her heart pounded, a mixture of fear and longing. She wanted to pull away, to protect herself from another heartbreak. But looking at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized that the walls she had built to protect herself were no longer necessary. Love, after all, was worth the risk. Over the next few days, Alexander became more than a lifeline. He became a partner, a confidant, and slowly, the man Vivian had once loved began to feel like home again. They laughed quietly in the hospital corridors, shared stories of their past, and even debated over trivial things: Alexander's insistence that Lila should have a pet turtle, Vivian's stubborn argument that a cat was better. Each moment, though small, stitched the frayed edges of their relationship together. One night, as Vivian rested against the hospital window, watching the city glow, Alexander sat beside her. "We can't ignore the future," he said softly. "Leela deserves a family that loves her, not just people who happen to be around when things go wrong." Vivian turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "And what about us?" Alexander reached for her hand. "We figure it out together. One step at a time. But I need you in my life, Vivian. I can't imagine doing this without you." Tears blurred her vision. She had spent years believing that independence meant strength, that pride could shield her from pain. But here, in the quiet intensity of the hospital night, she understood that love was strength too, and perhaps, letting someone in wasn't weakness, it was courage. The next morning, Leela opened her eyes with a small, hopeful smile. She reached out for Alexander, babbling something unintelligible but clearly joyful. Seeing his daughter respond to him so warmly, Vivian felt a wave of gratitude, relief, and undeniable affection. The man who had once been a source of frustration and heartbreak was now an anchor, a protector, and perhaps, a partner in more ways than she had ever imagined. As Leela's recovery progressed, Vivian and Alexander's bond deepened. They shared quiet dinners in the hospital room, celebrated small milestones, and slowly, love, trust, and forgiveness replaced the anger and resentment that had haunted them for years. By the time Leela was ready to leave the hospital, the transformation in their lives was palpable. The cold, business-focused CEO had softened without losing his strength, and Vivian, once fiercely independent and guarded, had rediscovered a love that was patient, enduring, and resilient, proving that sometimes the hardest walls to break were also the ones that protected the deepest hearts. The morning sun poured through the hospital windows, casting a golden glow over the quiet room. Lila lay peacefully in her bed, her tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. For Vivian, every heartbeat of her daughter felt like a miracle, a fragile reminder that hope had returned. And beside her, Alexander Kane stood silently, watching the little girl he had come to love as if she were his own. The weight of the past months reflected in his eyes. It had been a journey filled with tension, fear, and long-hidden truths. Alexander had arrived when pride and stubbornness ruled Vivian's life, but he had stayed through sleepless nights, tense decisions, and endless uncertainty, not with money, not with arrogance, but with unwavering dedication. He had become more than a savior for Leela. He had become a partner in her life, a steady presence that refused to let them face the world alone. Vivian remembered vividly the moment she had first allowed him in, desperate and protective of her daughter. Back then, she had promised herself it meant nothing, and yet, she realized now that in letting him help, she had opened the door to something far greater than she had imagined: forgiveness, love, and the chance to rebuild what had once been lost. Alexander stepped closer, a soft smile playing on his lips. "She's going to be okay," he said, his voice carrying both relief and quiet awe. "Thanks to you." Vivian shook her head. No, thanks to both of us. Her hand brushed against his, lingering just slightly longer than necessary. There was a magnetic tension in that simple touch, a connection that neither time nor distance had broken. The past weeks had forced them to confront not just their feelings, but their mistakes. The years of separation had left scars, resentments that had festered, pride that had built walls, but now, facing mortality, vulnerability, and the raw truth of family, those walls were crumbling. Vivian realized that love was not about perfection. It was about persistence, about showing up when it mattered most. And Alexander had shown up in every way possible. As Leela's health stabilized, the hospital staff slowly began to release their tight grip on her care. Doctors and nurses offered congratulations, smiles, and words of relief. Vivian felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for the medical team, but for Alexander, whose intervention had changed everything. She found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in months, laughter bubbling up when Leela reached out with tiny hands to touch her father's face. You know, Alexander said softly, crouching beside the bed, I was terrified too, but seeing you fight, I realized something. He paused, glancing at Vivian, his expression earnest. Family isn't something we choose lightly. It's something we fight for. And I want to fight for this us, together, as a family. Vivian's breath caught. The words echoed everything she had longed to hear, but had been too proud or too scared to admit. She felt the barriers of pride and past resentment crumble completely. Her heart, once guarded and wary, now throbbed with clarity. Love wasn't about control or money. It wasn't about proving strength. It was about being present, about showing up even when it was hard, even when fear threatened to consume you. I think I've always known that, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But I needed to see it. I needed to feel it, with you, and for Leela. Alexander took her hand in his, holding it firmly yet gently. Then let's do this together. No more walls, no more running from what matters. For the first time in years, Vivian felt completely safe to let go. The anger, the fear, the years of separation, all of it melted away in the warmth of this moment. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, sharing a silent understanding that words could never fully capture. They had both changed, grown, and learned the meaning of love in its truest, most selfless form. The following weeks were a delicate dance of healing and rebuilding. Alexander and Vivian worked side by side, adjusting to life with Leela and learning to navigate the complexities of trust and love. Their relationship was no longer defined by the past, but by their commitment to each other and their daughter. Simple moments, a bedtime story, a shared laugh, a quiet evening at home became treasures, a reminder that happiness was built in the little things. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the park near their home, Lila skipping ahead with uncontainable energy, Vivian looked at Alexander and smiled. I never thought we'd come this far, she said softly. Alexander squeezed her hand. Neither did I, he admitted, but life has a way of showing us what really matters. And you've shown me everything. Leela turned, calling out, Daddy, watch me. She ran across the grass, giggling, and Alexander chased after her, scooping her up effortlessly. Vivian's heart swelled with warmth, watching them together, father and daughter, laughter and love interwoven seamlessly as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Vivian realized that the story of their family had only just begun. The past no longer dictated their future. Every heartbreak, every mistake, every lost year had led them here to a second chance that was brighter, deeper, and infinitely more precious than they could have imagined. Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with sincerity. Are you ready for this? He asked, voice low but steady. Vivian smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Yes, she said, her heart full. For Leela, for us, for everything we've been through, and everything that's coming. In that moment, as the city lights flickered on and the world moved quietly around them, they understood the truth. Some love stories are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth forgiving for. And for Vivian, Alexander, and Lila, this was just the beginning of their happily ever after life, built not on wealth or pride, but on love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of family. If you've ever believed that pride or past mistakes could keep love at bay, Vivian and Alexander's story reminds us that hope, forgiveness, and unwavering commitment can rewrite any ending. Life is fragile, and the people we love are irreplaceable. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that second chances exist not just for love, but for family, trust, and the little moments that make life meaningful. Follow our channel for more heart-touching, emotional stories of redemption, courage, and the powerful bonds that make us human. Don't wait to embrace love today.